In this video, we're going to learn about redox reactions. And redox reactions are actually two different types of reactions that are often paired with each other. And so those two separate types of reactions are actually reduction reactions and oxidation reactions. So really, redox is an abbreviation for a reduction, oxidation reaction. In a reduction reaction, a molecule or an atom gains an electron. In an oxidation reaction, a molecule or atom loses an electron. And you can probably see why these two types of reactions are linked because the electron that is lost from the molecular atom that is oxidized ends up going to the molecule or atom that is being reduced. A common mnemonic to help you remember which reaction involves molecule and atoms gaining electrons and which reaction involves them losing electrons is this mnemonic of oil rig. And what this stands for is oxidation is the loss of electrons, whereas reduction is the gain of electrons. So let's take a look at an example of a redox reaction by looking at the elements sodium and chlorine. If you recall, sodium and chlorine form an ionic bond with each other. And that ionic bond occurs because sodium gives an electron to chlorine. And in doing so, sodium ends up as Na+, so it has a positive charge because it has one extra proton than it does electron. And chlorine ends up with a negative charge because it now has one extra electron than it has protons. And because of those charges, the Na+ and the Cl- form that ionic bond because the opposite charges attract. Now, in this example, sodium was oxidized. So Na, remember, is sodium, and sodium lost an electron. And remember our mnemonic of oil rig, where oxidation is loss and reduction is gain. So if sodium lost an electron, sodium went through oxidation. So sodium lost an electron, therefore sodium was oxidized. Chlorine gained an electron, and therefore chlorine was reduced. So as you can see, this is a very simple example of a redox reaction in which the sodium atom was oxidized, meaning it lost an electron, and chlorine was reduced because it gained that electron that it got from sodium. One reason why we're learning about redox reactions is because we're going to talk about these reactions more when we talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And during the processes of photosynthesis and respiration, the redox reactions are occurring in molecules that are covalently bonded. So it's a little bit different than the ionic bonds that we looked at in the previous example. Now, in molecules where covalent bonds are present, usually the electron that is being transferred or moved around is accompanied by a hydrogen atom. So the hydrogen atom is carrying that electron. And remember that hydrogen has an atomic number of 1 and an atomic mass number of 1, which means that a hydrogen atom has 1 proton, 1 electron, and typically 0 neutrons. And so by moving a hydrogen atom around, you are also transporting an electron around. And the transport of that electron is what is involved in these redox reactions. So some examples of covalently bonded molecules that are involved in the redox reactions of photosynthesis and cellular respiration include the following. So first of all, taking a look at photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, we'll be talking about a coenzyme that we abbreviate as NADP+. And this is just an abbreviation of a really long name of a chemical compound. So during some of the photosynthesis reactions, this molecule NADP+ is going to pick up some electrons. And it's picking up those hydrogens along with it. Because remember, the hydrogens are actually carrying those electrons. In doing so, the NADP plus gets converted into NADPH. And this reaction is reversible. Now remember our mnemonic of oil rig. And we'll see that since NADP plus is gaining an electron, NADP plus is being reduced. So the forward arrow is standing for a reduction reaction. The backwards arrow is then standing for the oxidation reaction because NADPH is giving up an electron in order to reform NADP+. Now, you might be wondering, where is this electron and subsequently the hydrogen coming from? And we'll talk about that more when we talk about these specific chemical reactions involved in photosynthesis. Essentially, those electrons are coming from other molecules, and then they're going to be transferred to other molecules. So we actually refer to these molecules as electron carriers. And we can actually, I like to draw either little dots or little stars to indicate that there are electrons being carried by this molecule. So these little dots stand for electrons. And like I said, we'll go into more of the details of where the electrons come from and where they are transported to when we talk about the specific reactions of photosynthesis. But for now, you just need to know that NADP plus gets reduced by gaining electrons in order to form NADPH. And then at some point later in the process, NADPH is going to be oxidized in order to transport those electrons to another molecule in the process. Now, in cellular respiration, we're going to take a look at a different molecule that has a similar abbreviation, but it is slightly different, but it does have kind of the same function as NADPH. And in cellular respiration, that molecule is NAD+. And once again, NAD plus is going to pick up some electrons and some hydrogen because the hydrogen is actually carrying the electrons. and it's going to form something called NADH. And of course, this reaction is reversible. And the forward reaction is a reduction reaction because NAD plus is gaining that electron, and reduction is a gain of electrons. So NAD plus gaining the electrons forms NADH. The reverse reaction is an oxidation reaction because NADH is going to lose those electrons and give it up to something else. Once again, this is an electron carrier, and I'll draw some little dots to remind myself that there are electrons being carried by this molecule. And once again, when we talk a little bit more about these specific reactions of cellular respiration, we'll talk about where that electron comes from and where it gets transported to. As a reminder, these redox reactions are going to be important when we talk more about the chemical reactions of photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So let's take a look at the overall reactions of these two important processes and see how they are related to each other. So first, let's start by talking about photosynthesis. So in photosynthesis, we have certain organisms that have the ability to take energy from the sun, and they can take carbon dioxide and water and form organic compounds. Specifically, we'll talk about glucose and oxygen. And so this forward reaction represents photosynthesis. Now, for cellular respiration, we could write out a whole chemical formula, kind of like we did here, but we could also just draw a reverse arrow. And so cellular respiration is really just the reverse of photosynthesis. But the energy formed in cellular respiration is in the form of ATP. So as you can see, these two reactions are really just opposites of each other. And in a future video, we will talk more about the reactions of photosynthesis and how they occur. And then we'll talk about the reactions of cellular respiration and how they occur as well.